Are you ready for a show that talks sports from the fans' point of view?
We've seen Michael Jordan score 37 points a game in his era. How many could he score in today's NBA?
There's not a player out there who I'd rather have than LeBron James.
Are you ready for a show that isn't afraid to challenge anyone when it comes to sports? If Adam Silver really wanted to fix tanking in the NBA, he would stop rewarding teams by giving them the best chance to win the draft lottery.
I mean, how many times will Roger Goodell drop the ball on handling domestic violence in the NFL?
Look, athletes have every right to talk politics, but if the fans stop tuning in, that's their right.
Then you're ready for Talk Back, a podcast where two fans debate the media narrative and discuss the world of sports as we see it.
Welcome to the show.
It's time for another edition of Talk Back. I'm one of your hosts, Eric Nesbit, and with me as always is your host and director of content, Justin Gay. Justin has a full lineup of talk-worthy NFL news for segment one, but this week we are only one segment. We've got holiday weeks ahead of us, so the week before Christmas, the week during Christmas, before New Year's, there's a lot going on with family plans, and your famous Talk Back podcast hosts, yes, that's right, we've got stuff to do, so Justin has Eagles, Rams, what is going on in that matchup? We certainly didn't see the result that we thought we were going to get. Kansas City and the Chargers, kind of a mess surrounding that division now, Justin. I know your Broncos are out of it, but still a lot to talk about there because really this past week, there was a lot of surprises in the NFL, and that also included teams like the Patriots and the Cowboys. So, Justin, there's a few teams that still control their own destiny and other teams that are trying to hang on for dear life for these 2018 playoffs on the road to the Super Bowl. We'll hit you up with episode 229 right after this.
We are back here on episode 229, and as Eric talked about in the opener, we are a one-segment show this week, and it is all NFL. So let's jump into the talk-worthy topics from this past week, week 15 of action in the NFL, and let's go right to Sunday Night Football. Eric, it wasn't that many weeks ago. Your Philadelphia Eagles were sitting at 4-6. They looked dead in the water. They looked like they had no shot at the playoffs. Now they find themselves really right in the thick of things, waiting for a Vikings team to slip up, and they could potentially jump into that number 6 seed. They go to L.A., they get a win over a Rams team that a few weeks ago felt like a foregone conclusion that was going to be a tick in the loss column for the Eagles. And it even seemed that way, Eric, going into this week as it was announced Carson Wentz was out with a back injury, so they turn it over to Nick Foles. And once again, Nick Foles delivers for this Philadelphia Eagles team. Eric, we've talked about the struggles of this team all year long. Plain and simple, is Nick Foles the answer to this Eagles team to get them back on track and into the playoffs?
Well, I would say that he is from a story perspective. I mean, look, Nick Foles, I respect the guy. I actually root for the guy. I think he does well in the backup role for the Eagles. I know we talked about this a lot when they were going on their run last year into the playoffs, through the playoffs, and then eventually into the Super Bowl as champions. Nick Foles is playing his role better than you could ever expect from a backup quarterback, a number 2 behind a guy like Carson Wentz. We've noted that Carson Wentz hasn't really looked like the guy that he was. I think he's still a little bit slow with his giddy up on the field after that ACL injury. I know he's been dealing with some other aches and pains. Now we know about this back injury. So there are certainly things from a quarterback perspective that just weren't really the same that they were even the year before. Now you have this story, and it was kind of just almost too poetic that it happened to where here we are again, 3 weeks remaining in the season. Nick Foles comes in. He can play the hero against the Rams, do something special for this team to kind of get them back into the mix. He does well, but I'm not willing to say that this is just some magical answer. his efficiency was good, 24 of 31 for 270 yards. That's not a bad stat line, but he didn't throw for any touchdowns and had one interception. So aside from the scoring plays in the running game, 2 from Smallwood and 1 from Adams, the team didn't do all that well. And honestly, a lot of Nick Foles' passes were to his favorite guy, Alshon Jeffrey, who I don't know what it is with Carson Wentz and Alshon, but they don't seem to kind of have that connection like Ertz and Wentz do. Meanwhile, you've got Foles, who Jeffrey is clearly his favorite guy, 160 yards to one receiver. That made up a tremendous portion of the Nick Foles yardage. So Justin, as I'm breaking this game down and I'm watching it, I saw an Eagles defense that played better than I had seen them play in a long time this year. Obviously, Jared Goff was quite frustrated. Todd Gurley was taken out of the action a little bit during the middle of the game. He had a good first half. Then he was battling that injury. I think that actually worked in the Eagles' favor there in the second half. Obviously, a guy as nitrous as Gurley is, you take him off the field and put a guy like Kelly in, you're just not going to have the same pop. So the Rams, they had a hard road to come back, and boy, they still almost did it. I think there was still a lot there to be concerned about as an Eagles fan, and I don't want to say, okay, now that they're 7-7, it's just all of a sudden they're a factor. I think this Eagles team, even as a fan, is something that it's a good story to talk about. It's a good story to write about, especially now with the Nick Foles angle. We know he's already been named the starter for this coming week. I think it's time to shelf Wentz for the season, kind of go back to where we were last year, say, okay, we got to get through the playoffs with Nick Foles, and that might be great, but I just don't think it's still overall the same Eagles team that we had last year. And I think this win, to me, said more about, well, we can kind of write our own story that looks kind of nice on paper and it kind of plays well in the media, but that doesn't mean they're going to go on the same run that they did last year.
I think you hit on it there with the defensive side. It just looked like they played with a lot of energy, that being the Eagles on Sunday night. And Eric, that was something you talked about way back early in the season when we were trying to figure this team out, was that their front seven could continue to get pressure. They were leading the league at the time in QB pressures. So you know that especially their front four can get to the quarterback, and they definitely had Goff frustrated in this game. But I thought, Eric, that the fact that Foles came in and he spread the ball around really got that offense moving. It felt like Carson Wentz, he just fell in love with throwing the ball to Zach Ertz, that he's either not comfortable or not completely healthy, and he knows Ertz and he likes that read, and he's not really getting everybody else involved. And it's similar to basketball. If you play pickup ball and you never get the ball, you're probably going to slack off on some of your things. Alshon Jeffrey was probably frustrated at times with Carson Wentz because he wasn't going his directions. He was only getting about 4 to 5 balls a game thrown to him. So I think the fact that they come in, they spread the ball around. You saw in the playoff run last year when they got Alshon involved, they could stretch the field some. That opened up a lot underneath. It opened up things for the run game. You saw both of those work for the Eagles. So that's why I wonder if it's not the best move, if Wentz simply is not healthy. It was basically this time last year, the Eagles went into L.A., and that's where Wentz got hurt with the knee injury and the ACL. So you sort of wonder, okay, he's only really 12 months removed from that. Is he just not bounced back? Is it Wentz? Is it the fact that Doug Peterson calls a different game? Maybe he's not as aggressive. Maybe he scales some things back. Maybe other guys on that team pick up the slack where they feel they don't maybe have to do as much when Wentz is out there because he carried them so much last year. And then when Foles came in, as you pointed to last year on the show, there's more than one guy on this roster. There's 51 other guys out there that can help shoulder the load. So I think it's a little bit of everything for this team. But if Wentz isn't right now with the back and he hasn't been maybe fully right with the knee, I don't know if the Eagles have a choice at this point, Eric, because they have a tough game coming up on Sunday with the Texans. They have to win out to have an opportunity to get to the playoffs. And maybe it's just plain and simple, this is a better football team, everyone involved, when it's Foles behind center and not a unhealthy Carson Wentz.
Yeah, and it's scary. If you're an Eagles fan and you've looked at Carson Wentz and looked at how well he was playing last year, certainly an MVP candidate before he went down with that knee. And now you look at how he played this year. You look at what Nick Foles did in the playoffs last year. You look at what Nick Foles was able to do leading the team to a victory over the Rams this past week. Now, if they go through and they win another game or two, the question then starts going through your mind, is this a Carson Wentz problem in Philadelphia? I don't know. Hopefully what you said was the key, which is Wentz isn't the answer when he's not as healthy as he should be versus he's definitely the answer when he's fully healthy. But there's a story that's starting to write itself here, and if the Eagles can somehow find a way to beat a very good Texans team, which I remember a couple of weeks back, I thought the Eagles would lose out to the Saints, the Rams, the Texans. I thought that was really the final nail in their coffin. Of course, they got blown out by the Saints. Now they end up beating the Rams. If they go out and beat the Texans, you'd have to think then they're ultra motivated to win that final game, get to 9-7 and see what happens. I just get concerned for the team and for the locker room. Yeah, they're excited at the moment, maybe make the playoffs, maybe try to go on another run. But then I feel like it leads to a lot of doubt in that organization as to, wait a minute, we've got this star QB that everyone loves in Carson Wentz, but the moves that we're making into the playoffs the past 2 years come when we have Foles under center.
And you got to remember, too, Nick Foles, he lost his offensive coordinator in Frank Reich. He lost his quarterback coach in John DeFilippo. I guess, of course, they could get him back since the Vikings sent him packing. But there's changes that have been made as well to the personnel and the people that Carson Wentz works with in terms of a coaching staff. So when you look at the Colts offense, for example, and how well it has come together and how well they're playing now in the second half of the season, you've got to think that's because the coaching is putting their hands on that team, similar to what they did with the Eagles last year. And even with what happened in Minnesota with DeFilippo, that just seemed to be basically a contrast in styles where Zimmer wants to run the football a lot more with Dalvin Cook and Latavius Murray. And DeFilippo wanted to put more on Kirk Cousins' hands with the wide receivers that they have. So it wasn't like they were flailing offensively. I mean, Adam Thielen went crazy through the first part of the season, and then he just kind of went away from that team. So you take those components out of there as well. I just think it's a bad mix. If you're not healthy, if you've got different coaches in there, if you're not running the same system, if you're trying to do everything that you were the last year, maybe the guys around you aren't as motivated because they all have a Super Bowl ring. I think that's just some of the impact. And now that Foles is in there, maybe everybody feels like they have to carry their weight. But Eric, let's take it to the other side with the Rams, because this is a Rams team now that's dropped 2 straight. It looked like for a while they were the cream of the crop in the NFC. It seems now the Saints have bypassed them. Is this a Rams team that you think peaked too early in the season and we've sort of seen their best football? Or is this a team that once they went into New Orleans and lost that game and lost that head-to-head tiebreaker, they just haven't been as motivated?
I think it's a valid question. I just don't know. The NFL this year is so hard to read. It just seems like that motto of any given Sunday is so true in NFL 2018, because we're just seeing results. And I know we're going to get to the Cowboys game here in a minute, but we're just seeing results that don't really make any sense sometimes. And if I were in a Survivor League, I would have been out, well, not only in week 1 when Tampa beat the Saints, but I would have been out probably every single week after that, going on what I thought was the sure thing, because it always seems to change. I mean, here we are talking about the Browns being still mathematically in the hunt for the playoffs. And I know that you and I talked about the fact that they might have a chance to get to at least even or maybe the over with the Vegas line on them. So it's not really that much of a surprise that they have 4, 5, 6 type wins in the season. But you're seeing games where Arizona or the Niners will come out and play someone hard, beat a team like Seattle who has everything to play for, when you would think on paper it looks like there's no way that the Niners should be able to do that. The Cardinals have done that a couple times. The Bills have done that a couple times. Meanwhile, we've got teams like the Jags that absolutely suck, that look like they were actually good for the first 3 weeks of the year. This NFL season has been absolutely crazy. So I think it's almost a 1 week at a time mentality if you're a team like the Rams. You know you're good. Yes, you just lost to the Bears, which are division leaders in the NFC North. You just lost to the Eagles, who are fighting for their lives. You lost a tough one to New Orleans before that, but you've won every other game that you were supposed to win this year, including week 3 against those Chargers that are playing so well. So I don't think the Rams, if they look at the overall picture, have anything to be that concerned about. But now you look at who they have left to play, they must win those games, because those are games against Arizona and San Francisco that they should win. And so I would only start to really materialize the answer to this question as a yes, they should be worried about peaking too soon if they go out and lose to the Cardinals or the Niners in one of the 2 weeks ahead.
I'll tell you, Eric, I'm still concerned about Jared Goff. I thought he had turned the corner. He was really sort of hitting his stride. And the last couple weeks, I mean, it's okay to go in and have some bad games, but he's not only having games where he's not that accurate with the football and he's struggling, and he's throwing interceptions, but he made mistakes the other night that are in that Jameis Winston type of play where he's going down and he just makes basically, instead of just taking the loss, he makes a much, much worse decision for that football team and gives the Eagles basically a golden opportunity to jump up on them at that point with just a horrible interception. So I'm still concerned about Goff when the competition